This episode is sponsored by Property Filter. Find great deals faster.
Hello and welcome to the Financial Freedom Podcast, sponsored by us at Property Portfolio Building. This podcast is designed by real people on their journey to achieving financial freedom, and we'll focus on people who've either already attained it, who are joining us on that journey, or maybe a specialist topic that can help you build your technical knowledge to achieving and maintaining that financial freedom. We hope you enjoy it. Welcome back to the Financial Freedom Podcast. Today is one of our technical episodes and we're in our Build Better environment. We're going to be talking about how to issue and get the best out of your tender process and what to include, and then how to get from that position to agreement of a contract with a builder to make sure that you have a really great start on site during your program. With me as always is my co-host Tim Witt. Hi Tim.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So again, for anybody new, do you want to just give your credibility on?
Yeah, so my credibility on this topic is, I say it fairly regularly, but I've always worked in property and construction. My background was I studied construction management economics at university in South Australia. I then worked as a project manager for a building company in Adelaide for about 7 or 8 years, managing lots of different types of building projects, ranging from small refurbishments up to big $20 million nursing homes and stuff like that. And I've also, when I moved to the UK in 2014, I worked consultancy project management for overseeing big development projects. And I've also worked for a big development company that I was representing as a project manager on, large high-rise residential building projects and things like that. So overall about 17 years experience in the building and property industry.
So you don't have to mention your private stuff then, no, for the landlord developers out there.
Oh, yeah. So, I missed out a big part there. So from about 2018 onwards, I was building my own portfolio using small scale developments.
Yeah.
Buy, refurbish, refinance. So I built up about a £9 million property portfolio of my own. So between 2018 and 2021, it was a side hustle because I was still working a day job while doing all these projects and developments. And since then, we've continued doing it for our own portfolios and our portfolios, and also for clients where we're doing about 20 to 30 small scale development projects a year at the moment.
Okay, so more than one tender issued is what we're going to say.
How many tenders issued?
Yeah.
Hundreds and hundreds.
Of tenders. Right, lovely. So that's good credibility in terms of your background and so on.
Yeah, so I used to do, actually, when I worked for the building company in Adelaide, I did the building estimates where I had to do the overall estimates, submit a tender price to a developer or client to then win the project as a builder.
Yeah.
So I've done that side, and then obviously now and for the development company, the overall budget of everything.
Lovely.
So I've had all facets basically.
Lovely. But as always, this is your experience and it's how we work.
Yeah.
You do your own due diligence on how.
Yeah, exactly. These are our experiences and opinions basically on this topic. Yeah.
And this is so that today we're going to be taking you from the point where you've finished all your scope of works, because we have another episode on that part. So in our Build Better program, how to build a scope of works and how to build a budget, we've already covered. Yep. So we're now talking about we're building our tender. Yeah. What to issue, and then we're going to how to get the pricing in and how to engage the builders, and then how to contract with the builders. And we're going to take you through that process because that's a very important process. And in my opinion, the most rushed part within this build program, and it can also be the bit that goes the most wrong. So it's really, really important. So let's crack straight on, shall we?
Yeah, sounds good.
Right, question 1. What is a tender and what should you include?
Yeah, so a tender is basically a process where the building contractors in this circumstance. So let's say we use the same example we did for our build budget where we're converting, say, a terrace house to a 6-bedroom, co-living HMO that we do quite regularly. So basically we want to get quotations from building contractors on an apples for apples basis that obviously we can assess and compare, know exactly what it includes, and then transfer that into a JCT contract where the price is agreed and all the terms and conditions agreed, and then that builder goes on and delivers that project with the exact scope, design, specification and price that we've agreed.
Lovely. So, and bear in mind, we've already got a budget. We're trying to guide to make sure that...
Yeah, so we have a cost plan budget that we put in place, and that was what our appraisal was based on. So we want the building quotes and the overall build cost to come within that budget. So a good way to describe the tender with the builders is that price is the build contract price, and then there will still be some costs outside of that, which will need to sit in your overall build budget in your appraisal, and that would include things like, say, in this circumstance, furniture. So, if you order the furniture separately, that's going to be a separate price. The way we do it is we have a contractor that does specialist bedroom furniture for the HMOs that includes, say, the bed base, the mattress, the desk, wardrobe, bedside drawers, and things like that as a standard package. And then they come and install that as their own contractor, even while the builder's doing other works or finishing off other works. And then we also order all the other individual bits and pieces to get it ready for tenanting, such as, say, curtains, blinds, artwork, mirrors, all those little fixtures and fittings that can get it to a nice position, fully furnished, ready for tenants to move in. So you'll need a budget for those furniture elements. And then you also need, something, say, like VAT, because the contract or the builder's quote will probably be excluding VAT. So you need a budget for that because you will have to pay it. And also a budget for, you could call it contingency, for things that aren't included in the builder's quote.
Okay, we've already done budgets.
Yeah.
So we need to move on to what to include in the tender itself.
Yeah.
So of that part of the budget, okay, what are we putting into the tender for the builder?
So the way that we structured it for a package that goes out to our bidding contract, so we might have, say, 3 building contracts we're going to get quotes for.
Yep.
That's what we generally do. And we've got 3 builders do lots of work for us that we call our panel builders. If you go out to just one, obviously you don't have anything to compare it to. If you only go out to 2.
And what's the problem with doing that? Why can't you just go to one builder and get one price?
They may be busy, so they may just quote it higher because they don't want it. Say similar if you go to 2, whereas if you go 3, you got a good spread. And also 3, if you look at it from a risk perspective, even a builder that you worked for a long time, they might get into financial hardship or problems, and you may need to replace them. If you got 3 quotes, and they're fairly similarly priced, at least you've got 2 other options if the worst thing was to happen to, say, during your build process, as a risk mitigation measure as well.
Lovely. All right then. So the structure of the tender then. What are we doing? Yeah.
So the things that we include are, initially we'd have an invitation to tender. So it has basic information like the property address, what it's going to be, and the timeline that we expect the builder to quote the work and submit their price. And then things like maybe some standard terms, things like this will be a JCD contract based on these standard terms. Also, we call this number to arrange a site visit so we can get a site visit organised with the builder so they can see the site quite quickly. So general things like that, invitation to tender. Then on top of that, like you said before, we've got our scope of works or our schedule of works to include as well to price against. So we'd also have our building regulation drawings in there that detail all the requirements to get it to a building control sign-off perspective. Some things might be on the drawings, like, say, your exact insulation type, which may not be in the schedule of works, or some things may be in your schedule of works, like, say, replace the roof or re-roof, that aren't on those building regulation drawings, so they don't need to be. And then also we'd have a finishes specification, which specify all the finishes of all the elements, say paint finishes, plumbing finishes, taps, sinks, showers, things like that, electrical, second fix, sockets, lights, etc., but include all those floor finishes, so the builder can basically price against everything that's required. What are some of the other things that we would include? Would say we might have been to site, got a video of the site and some photos. So even though you're organising a site visit with the builder, you can also include them that they can refer back to.
So site visit is part of the tender?
Yeah, we basically say in the invitation, please contact this project manager to arrange a site visit, and we'll arrange it and take you out there. So so they've got all the info and they can do the site visit. And those. Also, the other thing we include would say an outline program to say if it's going through, say, a conveyancing process or whether it's completed, is like roughly this is what we're predicting is the program of works to get to site. And then we'd also request the builder submits a Gantt chart program or a proposed program duration of the works as well with their tender.
So we're doing this then pre-purchase in that case, but you can do it post-purchase, or when you already own a property.
Yeah,
but it's just to be clear with the builder when those works may start.
Yes,
because if you're not clear, well,
And obviously you want to plan as best as possible as you can and communicate with your builders, because, you know, some builders that you're expecting a price from might be at capacity. It might be too busy to do the work. So you're expecting a quote from them, but they can't do it. Or if they do it, they're just going to put a really high price on it because they can't do it. So instead of just not pricing and letting you down, they'll just give a high price or something like that. But the earlier you can communicate and give indication of time, the better that everyone can plan for it and schedule in for it, including the builder.
Yep, great. So you send your tender out. It's got those elements. So invitation to tender, building regulation drawings, scope of works. Scope of works that includes provisional sums and PC sums or whatever. We've already talked about, so we're not going to cover them right now because you're trying to get apples for apples. You set your timeline and your invitation to tender. You put your finisher schedule in there, and then you go to site and you go around with your builder. What are you doing at that point when you attend site with the builder?
Yeah, so obviously they can assess the condition of the site, the access requirements, you know, and all those sort of things, see the conditions of certain elements. And sometimes there'll be things that, you know, you might alter on the scope of works or agree on site. But usually we've gone through quite thoroughly with our team and the scope of works is pretty clear. But yeah, it's familiarization with everything that's required, basically.
And if Builder 1 recommends something, that might be a variation to the scope that you've already done or a variation to the drawing that you've already done, realistically, if you agree with that variation, you should make that variation.
Yeah, so what you can do in the tender process, the standard thing is called an addendum to the tender. So let's say in your scope of works, you haven't put down to replace the roof. But on an inspection with, say, the building contractors, or you've had a separate survey or something like that, it's determined that actually we now believe the roof should be replaced. You should send an addendum out to, say, those 3 building contractors, say, addendum to the tender pack, please include a price to re-roof the roof area, which was not included in the original scope. And then that way, all of those building contractors will price against it, and it's apples for apples. Because again, like you said, if one builder puts it in, and it's say £8,000 and the others haven't, it's not an apples for apples comparison when you get all the quotes in.
Yeah, and you also want to be clear on the sums you've included.
Yeah.
Even because you might write a sum for, you know, kitchen, but if you put in a scope of kitchen, you haven't included install a kitchen necessarily. You've just put kitchen, which is just the purchase of the materials. You expect them to install the kitchen. You want to make those bits really clear when you're walking around, really, because if you again get 2 prices that are vastly different, then quite often it's because you've done something that isn't correct in your tender process. Because reality is that the cost of materials and the cost of labour isn't vastly different. So the only difference can be either the builder doesn't want the job or is underpriced, or the builder is overpriced and has miscalculated what is and isn't in the tender. So if those things are happening, you might even need to revisit the tender before decision.
Yeah. So the materials, really, because we got the finished spec, should be pretty much the same or very similar. It would only come down to if one builder could negotiate a better price with the supplier compared to the other. That's the only real variance, isn't it? Because the spec is exactly the same in theory. Labour can vary a bit. You know, rates are similar, but sometimes it just depends how efficient the team is, and things like what you'd call overheads and preliminaries can vary depending on the builder's, you know, general overhead costs or their overall team and separate expenses and things like that.
Lovely. So you've sent it out. You generally agreed apples for apples, and then the builder sends the pricing back. What do you do?
Yeah, so you get the quotes back in. Let's say you got your 3 prices, and you know, one's at 105,000, one's at 108, and one's at 110. So generally, some builders will just send you the price and not include anything else.
Yeah, just literally, I'll do it this much.
So some that we work with, because they know exactly the scope we do and they've done so many projects with, that's what they'll do. And generally that means they've included everything in the scope of works. They've included to install the furniture bits we supply, but not order the furniture.
And this is one of the things that people get very confused about, because if you've been good at your job, which is giving the builder all their information, and you've been good at pointing out everything, and they give you a price, then you've done everything and you've got your price. Whereas a lot of people then go, oh, can you itemize this for me?
Yeah. And sometimes in that circumstance, there might be a specific inclusion or exclusion. So it might be just, we might not have said replace the windows as an example, but the builder isn't, when he went to site, he thought, actually, really do need replacing. Didn't communicate this. Otherwise, we would have done the addendum we said before. But he just said, my quote's this. This includes window replacement of £7,000. But then the other quote is completely blank. So you might want to either clarify with that builder, did they include it or not, because it's not in the scope. If not, then you need to be able to compare
exactly.
apples
Because if
for
a builder
apples.
tells you they've included something that isn't on the scope,
Yeah.
then you have to qualify it with the other builders.
Yeah. And then the other side, you can get quotes which itemize everything.
Yeah.
So really what you have to do at that point is to compare it to the other quotes that haven't itemized, that is to go through your scope of works, which the other builders have priced theoretically, and compare. So, and you literally have to get a highlighter out and go through the quote. And if our scope of work says 50 mil installation and they've allowed 25, then you need to either get them to adjust it so it's apples for apples, or work it out so it is a fair comparison.
And how do you do that? Do you do that with the builder, or do you do that yourself?
So I would get, like, if I've got the quote itemized, I would get the scope of works and the drawings out and compare it, highlight anything that I think might be different. Then I'd raise it with the builder and see, is it and why? And if I think that, so I'd either ask them to change it and say, like, actually, because the drawing says 50 mil installation, you need to update your quote because it says 25. He might say, oh, actually, it is 50, so it's a typo, and he just types it, doesn't change the price. Or he say, oh, actually, I do need to change the price, and then they do it. Or if there's things they're not going to change, what you can do is work out just a general allowance for it. So you go, like, actually, to upgrade to that insulation is going to be at £800. So actually, I'll put a spreadsheet in this builder. I'm going to add in £800. So that's apples for apples now with that, and do it that way.
And there's some critical things you need to know whether they've included or not, right? The most simple one is VAT.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is...
And what the amount of VAT as well.
Yes.
Because, you might get a quote which is just, it's silent on VAT. So have they included it or not included it? Sometimes we'll just say plus VAT. And then it's clarifying, what, if you have included for it and it's including VAT, is it 5% or 20%? In this circumstance, it should be 5%. So you need to check
if it's a conversion.
If it's a conversion project, like our example here.
Yeah.
Because if they've incled 20 and the other builders included 5, then obviously you've got variance that's not apples for apples.
We're talking about a C3 house to a C4 HMO.
Yeah.
Small HMO. So that's converting from one use class to another use class under PD.
Yeah.
And therefore, there's
exactly right.
You can
so if you think from that tender comparison, the real, and then the other things you can compare outside of price are what's their proposed program of works. So you might have 3 builders. One says 18 weeks, one says 20, one says 19 or whatever, and you can weigh that up. And general, what is the actual availability? So if you want to start on site in 3 weeks, 2 builders can start in 3 weeks. The other ones, really, they can't for 2 months. Obviously, you need to consider that because the 2-month builder might be the best price.
Yep.
But if they can't start for 5 weeks later than the other 2, your site might.
There's also a risk of them drawing out the JCT signing, or the contract signing process.
Yes.
And that kind of stuff, which is your cost might creep up, and
Yeah, and also if you've worked with the builders before and the experience with them and how well they've performed and quality of works, you got to weigh that up and all those sort of things. So it's in no way should it just be an assessment on price.
Lovely. So you've got your tenders pricing back. You've qualified key things with the builder.
Yeah.
What's next?
Yeah, and if you decide that, all right, because of these key things, my preferred builder is this one at this point in time. So then at that point, you've got some key things that you've either pre-agreed, which would be things that you agree for the JCT contract we talked about, or you still may need to agree that.
And the contract form, we mentioned JCT, I mentioned it, you mentioned it, we're talking because we use the JCT minor works for this type of project.
Yeah.
Depends on your project and what type of contract you do.
Yeah.
But also, you'd be submitting that as part of the tender, so they can look over the terms and conditions.
Yeah. So you can mention the standard JCD type and the year, and that can go on the tender, and then they'll know that that's the type of contract that's being used.
Yep.
Or you could send the blank document and say this is what the terms and conditions would be.
Yeah, if they've never used one.
Bar these site specific.
Because you do get that. You get some builders who've never used it before because they may have done full house refurbishments.
Yeah.
They may have even done HMO refurbishments, but they've not done a C3 to C4 refurbishment at this value, and therefore.
Yeah, and just to be clear, the JCT is quite a fair agreement. The standard one is anyway because it's been agreed over many years between different parties and everything like that, and lots of experience. And then the first thing to say is when you're getting a builder into contract is, you need to be a good developer to work for. So obviously you want to agree key things so it's clear for one to help the process go smooth, protect your risk. But also you don't want to just dictate things. You need to agree these terms and be fair and reasonable to your builder, so they want to work with you.
And once you've got your price and you know who you're going to go with, you can say to them, look, my intent is to appoint you.
Yeah.
However, we need to go through something we call a contractor interview. You might not say that to them, but we need to go through the key points that were going to be captured in the terms and conditions.
So some of the key things that you need to agree that then form the contract. The good thing, a lot of them are transferable from the tender.
Yeah.
So if you've got the drawings and you've got the scope of work agreed from the tender and that they're priced as per those, then that's what we've agreed for the contract. Is like that scope of works and those drawings go into the contract. That's what we've agreed. Some other things we just talked about before is program duration. And you either want a Gantt chart program or a week by week schedule that shows, this is the program works based on this price and this scope of works. That goes in the contract. For our type of contract, we're talking about what that won't include for delays that are, say, unforeseen. That might be a variation cost. So say unforeseen structural problems and things like that, extra
delay
works.
Utilities installation.
Delay in utilities. So
anything that the builder isn't in control of, basically.
Yeah. So some other contracts, like a design and build contract for usually for large developments, the builder can take the risk for those things. But for this example, we're talking about, utility time frame is generally the developer's risk. So if that's delayed and that delays the builder, then they're entitled to an extension, an extra cost and time, etc.
Even things that might vary the works as well. So you might get an EPC guy in to say, can you do my assessment, please? That might be during this tender process.
Yeah, so that's a good point, actually. I did slightly miss it out, but when we're building up our design for the tender, we get an EPC assessment done because these type of properties, we want to achieve a C as a minimum. So we don't want to get to site and then have to spend more money or delay the works if we get it in the design in the first place.
Yeah, or you might be going through a planning process and the planning's pending award, and you're not going to get notice. You're waiting. You can take 2 to 2 weeks for them to issue the notice, and then
sometimes
you tender, and then they say, "Oh well, here's some acoustic work."
Sometimes there's planning conditions. That's a good example. So you might have design requirements that need to agree with planning that take a bit of time to get through. So you need a process to get them implemented with the builder as well. But the contract, it does allow for, variations to be included. But if they haven't factored into their program, then it's unfair to expect them to still finish in the same time if they have been delayed for those reasons. So program work's really important. Further to what we said, so if there are variations because of, say, unforeseen things that are found on site, not included in the scope of works, or design changes, say, because of planning conditions or because you've decided to change something, there needs to be a process agreed in the contract of how that's implemented. So what you can do, the general process is if you have a project manager or a contract administrator, they issue an instruction to the builder. Mr. Builder, we've now agreed this planning condition with the council, which includes this bike holder in this room. Please either provide us a quote for this or proceed with the work, something like that. So it's incorporated. So the process for that needs to be agreed. I think you mentioned provisional sums before as an example. So let's say
because you wanted to put we talked about those in the previous episode about putting them in to get apples for apples in your scope of works as a separate sum.
So let's say the fully detailed kitchen design isn't done, and we've had a provisional sum in the tender of, say, £8,000. Then we've gone and got the design detailed by, say, Howdens or something like that. And then we've that's ready to
get. The kitchen manufacturers are available.
Other are available as an example. People know how does that they and then we need to instruct that into if the builder is part of their works order, we just want to say this is the design. You need to get that ordered and get it moving, etc. So there needs to be a process for that.
Stop the podcast now. This episode is sponsored by Property Filter. Property Filter is the #1 property tool for today's property professional. It brings in all the data points and sources from all the property portals and auction sites into one convenient place. Then you have the option to overlay all the clever strategies found in the Property Filter blueprint to find motivated sellers faster. Now, we use it on a daily basis. It saves us over 80% of our time when looking for properties. And if that sounds like something that you want in your lives, please go to register.property-filter.co.uk/PPB, which is the discount code for this podcast. You will get 2 weeks free and a discount on your first month. That's it from me. Back to the podcast.
And then sometimes what you can agree is, say, if you want to sign off as a developer samples of things before you order it. So you might have a finished specification, but you might say, this is the finish we want for this. However, please submit a sample to us before ordering, just to make sure it's signed off.
Yeah, and you might issue a finishing schedule and then something's been discontinued. We've had that with some of our
So you're right. Materials, sometimes what you've specified may not be available, or there might be a more cost-effective alternative that can get brought in to save you and the builder money that gives you the same intent. And what you need is a bit of a schedule of timing of when that sample needs to be provided to you and signed off, so then it doesn't delay the project. So you can have that included in the contract as well.
Don't let the builder sign that off by themselves. You need to view the quality of things.
Yeah, depending what it is. If you've specified a paint color with this type of paint manufacturer and he orders that, you don't really need to sign it off because you specified already. You know what it is.
Sorry, I mean if it's a variation.
If it's a variation, you want to be able to sign it off. Or if it's you've specified something like you said, and the material's now no longer available, and they're like, oh, we can now use this material. Yeah. You want to be able to. And it's good. It's a good
way to set out, because there's also some fundamental things that you might need to give the okay on, like, with the best one in the world, your architectural drawing might not have included your EPC, acoustic and insulation boarding requirements, and therefore your room sizes aren't quite what they were, and you need to adjust where the stud walls go, and you have to make an architectural change, and you have to come back, and then you want to see it like paced out in the room or whatever. So it just sets a good precedent, I think, for saying actually,
and the contract does have a process for those things, but you just need to be reasonable to go, like, if that alteration or change has happened as a responsibility of the developer, there might be an extra cost and time implication associated.
And it's one of the things that at this point, because we're now approaching putting this into the contract, is that it is your responsibility. So in the contract, there's two terms. One is employer and one is contractor. You are the employer, and the contractor is the contractor, or your contract administrator is the employer, and the contractor is the contractor. The responsibility for any of those things that change is on the employer. It's not on the builder. So
unless they deviate from something that is in the contract.
Yeah.
So if they decide to change a material that's specified, the onus is then on them to get the sign off.
Yeah, if they do something that you haven't signed off, then it becomes their responsibility. So you just need to sometimes make that really clear, especially if it's a builder who's maybe new to doing a conversion or something like that, or they've just been told before, oh, here's 35 grand. Please upgrade my property in your kitchen, your bathroom, I'll leave you to it.
Yeah.
There may need to be like, well, actually, no, we've got license standards, planning standards, we have to maintain.
And that's why we're doing all of this, just to be clear with exactly what's included and what's agreed. So another one to agree is payment terms.
Absolutely.
So in this sort of space, in these type of conversions, it's a real issue that I see with other investors is the build is expecting one thing, the investors thinking another thing, and there's a complete misalignment, and that causes problems.
Yeah. Or the builder expecting one thing, the investors agreed it based on their concept of what's happening, and their lender dictates it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a big one.
Good example. So a lot of these, you might use bridging development finance, and it's a 5-month build program. So the lenders agreed 5 drawdowns or something, example. So really it's 1 per month. But if the developers agreed with the contractor that they get paid fortnightly or weekly, but they don't actually have the cash flow to do it, that's a problem. Some builders either they've agreed deposits up front, or they're expecting it. The funds may not be available for that. So the key is to be clear and agree it up front. And with all parties, like you said, if you've got a lender, you've got the builder, you need to agree with both parties, basically. So everyone's clear.
And if you are doing it to drawdown, and the drawdown needs a surveyor to sign off, then you should include that.
Yeah.
right? Because unless you're going to cash fund and then reclaim, which is another way to fund a project.
Yeah.
If you're reliant on those funds to come in, which is the most common, that the employer or the owner or the developer, it requires that funds to hit their bank before they can pay the builder. You need to know to the nth degree what that process is for that sign off. So if your builder comes to you on a Friday and says, I need paying, can you pay me by Wednesday next week? That's a problem, because if you haven't instructed a monitoring surveyor, it's their availability. They have an SLA.
Yeah.
They then have another SLA to then submit the report.
Yeah, so it's agreeing the overall time frame and process for it, isn't it? Yeah. So if you think from the time, to book in the monitoring surveyor to then he comes to site, does the report, sends to the lender agrees it and actually pays the funds, it might be a week.
2 weeks.
Yeah, 1 to 2 weeks as an example. So you need to be clear on that process. And then the schedule of like the cost breakdown of, say, the trade packages, so you can assess it on a percentage basis. So that's
an important point.
So you're paying, as close as possible as to what's actually being completed
and
on
site.
You
do need to have that percentage basis as well, and you need to be able to agree rule of thumb where they're up to. So if they're installing, like, I don't know, showers as an example, they've installed 3 of 6, that you're going to agree 50%.
Yeah.
Because if they need the funds, maybe they need the funds to buy the next 3. You don't know. I mean, that's probably a poor example. They'll probably buy them all at the same time. But you can't just say, oh, well, I'm not paying you until it's 100% done, because that is a risk to your project. It's a risk to you because the builder might run out of money.
Yeah.
So you have to have that process in place.
Yeah, and just be very clear with the builder that, like,
I've seen it.
If that's the process you're going to pay, because some might just go like, 5 months, I split it into 5 sectors, but actually
equal
the works,
or bi-weekly or monthly.
The actual works completed on site of what's fair will change dramatically. So some months the builder might be quite a bit down on what there should be. Some months they might be quite a bit up. But if you just tell them, actually, we're going to pay you for what's completed.
If he's gone through strip out, structural, first fix, and stud, then that's a heavy spend environment. Right. Yeah. So if you've agreed a small amount per bi-weekly or per month, and he comes to you and says, no, I need another 20 grand, and you can't do that, that's a problem.
Yeah, it can cause problems.
So you do need to have that really, really nailed, really, because that's one of the biggest problems in building that I see.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and we talked about it before, but VAT amount, be absolutely clear on what that is and how that's budgeted for.
And it would be different to the builder and sometimes the things that the builder purchases, because his might be 5%, but then trying to get the kitchen supplier to agree 5% might be different.
Yeah.
So his overall might be 5% because he's doing a conversion, but it doesn't mean that all suppliers are going to charge 5%. No.
So in the example we're talking about, the 5% only really applies to the build contract. Yeah. All other materials that you order directly, they're going to be 20.
Yeah, and that's only live today. It's today's VAT rules. If it changes, then you'll need to make that necessary change. And it's only for certain things, conversions or really rundown property or something like that. If it's not inhabitable or whatever,
Yeah, some other things to agree for the contract as well is, say, liquidated and ascertained damages. So
what is that?
So what that means is, if it's a rate that you would agree with the builder, if they were delayed, that you were entitled to, say, as the developer.
Yeah.
Because
all your money back.
Well, it really it can vary on the size, the development size of the builder, and all those sort of things. So
it typically offsets your costs, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Your additional costs.
So just to explain what it is really, it's a set figure. So if something does happen, it doesn't matter what happens, how much it actually costs you or whatever. It's just that's the rates agreed.
Yeah.
Because, sometimes the losses to the developer could be quite a bit more than the rate agreed or less, but it doesn't matter. It's just that is the rate.
You need to be fair on this, right? Because
so in this circumstance, absolutely you have to be fair, because these size builders, if they haven't worked with it before, it may be very difficult to agree at all, because they can get work where they don't have that risk. If they're very small, they probably might not have ever heard of it before. Larger developments that I used to work in my job, it's just completely normal. It's just like, it was more about what the actual rate was rather than whether it would happen.
Landlord developer, sort of not quite small, doing a kitchen, but not quite.
So the balance is to be, have it in there to protect your risk or your client's risk, but in a fair and reasonable way. But then also the things you consider as, say, a bonus, if the builder finishes early, you get the benefit of that project finishing early with the extra rent saving of, say, interest, etc. So why not reward the builder for that? So that sometimes that's a good way to explain it.
And rent interest is one of the great ways to actually work out your liquidated damages.
Yeah.
Because if you have to extend your loan, or you're going beyond the build program, without authorized sign off for something that's out of their control, and you're paying $100,000 a percent a month.
Yeah,
because
there's two things generally to look at. It's like, what is it actually costing you if it's delayed? So you're saying there's 3 months delayed, and you've got 3 months of interest and holding costs, say council tax and fees or whatever. That's just a physical cost.
Yeah.
But then there's also like, what are you losing out of? So it's like, if it was rented out 3 months ahead, it's the opposite, because you're actually making money on it. So that's difficult in these size developments to agree, because it would just get unviable for the builder, too much risk for them. But some of the larger scale developments I did, some of the damages were like, loss of income and stuff like that. But it becomes
at this level, physical loss to you is probably the most impactful, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's going to cost me, £500 every 2 weeks in interest. It's going to cost me £250 a month in council tax.
And then the other thing to consider when when would you actually enforce it? Because you want to have good working relationship with the builders. You want to protect your risk, but it's
important
if they're 2 weeks late and they've done everything they could and all those sort of things.
But you should also have your contingency. On your timeline. So whatever timeline your builder submits, you should also have your contingency.
It's a very good point, actually, because like we said, there's cost contingency because of unforeseen things. So why not have a program contingency? And we see this with clients sometimes, like, the contract says this. It's like, but actually they've now replaced all of the floor joists on the ground floor, to do some structural stitching. They replaced the windows that weren't factored in for the variation or whatever.
Had a 3-week holiday.
Yeah. Sometimes they had a 3-week holiday, but sometimes they're just entitled to the extension. And sometimes these builders aren't managing their administration well enough to actually request it, but they are entitled to it.
And you need to ask questions when it comes to that program. What's going to happen during December?
Yeah.
What's going to happen during August? What's going to happen over Easter? What's going to happen when the school closes? How many guys are you going to lose? Do you need an extra bit of time? So you need to build in a contingency for yourself as well on that, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's actually a good point, because we now in that later end of the year, so some of our building contracts go into the new year, and I had a client say, I've added up the weeks of what you said, but it should finish, I think, 2 or 3 weeks earlier. And I said, well, straight away, have you included the Christmas break? Because we've added in the Christmas break in that period. Because we
Between
can't...
the 15th of December and 1st of January.
It's very unreasonable to expect them to work then, and they're not going to be working. So you got to factor that in. So it's a really good point.
You don't want them working.
No.
They're having a good time.
No, it's probably dangerous if they're rocking up after some of the good times they're having.
It's hard enough after the fall on Monday, mate.
It is, you're right. Anyway, it's a different discussion. But then the other key things to agree is like completion of the project. What are you expecting the builder to provide? So there's things like operation and maintenance manuals, testing compliance certificates and things like that. So just be clear exactly what you're expecting. So when you get to the back end of the job.
So for a 6-bed HMO, what's the typical? Well,
that obviously is an absolute minimum for a landlord. You need the gas safety certificate and the EICR certificate.
Yep.
So they're the bare basics. Then for your HMO license application, you need things like fire alarm test certification. You'd need fire risk assessment, which is actually by a separate party, emergency lighting test certificates and things like that.
But I would also want any white goods and anything that they've installed that may carry a warranty.
Right. So sorry, we'll flip back actually. So the other thing in the JCD you can agree is a defects liability period. So just to explain, a defects liability period is for sort of workmanship or anything relating to the builder's works for a period of time. So it could be 6 or 12 months. And then separate to that, you've also got, like you said, product warranties.
Yeah.
So say your boiler would have a product warranty if you apply for it, your hob, oven, fridge, freezer. So even though technically the builder would have to sort it within 12 months, some of those, like a boiler, might have a 5 or 10 year warranty. So you need to apply for that and get that in place.
And that's in your name?
Yeah.
As the employer?
Yeah. So pretty much as the developer employer, you need to get them applied for yourself. Sometimes you might just need the specification and code from, say, the builder or your project manager, then apply for it. Yeah. So those things are really important to get into contract, and there's some key requirements you need to consider.
Lovely. And then we are then going to move to contract. You've agreed everything. You've done your contractor interview to make sure all of these things are ticked off and checked. Your builder agrees with, and you agree with your builder that everything is ticked off. You enter into contract. You sign the JCT contract.
Yeah.
Okay. Then there's some other tasks. Okay. So I've got some follow-up questions which aren't related to the JCT contract.
Right. Okay.
So, so who's responsible for building control at this point?
So building control responsibility is, well, sometimes it depends on your contractual terms. Usually they're always engaged by the developer direct.
Which is the employer or the developer? This is you?
Yeah, this is you as the property developer. Depending on the type of contract is to whether the responsibility for, say, site visits and design implication is to where that sits. So the JCT contracts we use, if building control come to site and say, actually, I know the drawing said 50 mil insulation, but because of Part L requirements, I want 100 mil insulation, that would technically be a variation because the build is priced on the 50 mil building control.
Which was in your building regs.
Yeah, and don't forget, the building control could have done the plan check and not raised it before, but, they can come to site and raise things like that if they want. That's their discretion, basically, at the end of the day. You can obviously try and challenge these things and negotiate, and that's part of the work of a good project manager as well, to mitigate those things. But in essence, for this type of contract we're talking about, that would be a variation cost. Some of the larger developments I worked on, that risk sat with the builder because they had a design and build contract all inclusive. So, if they price something but building control says something different, they just had to implement it, and it wasn't a variation. So it depends on your type of contract.
And at this level, a design and build contract is...
Yeah, it's a bit... this level, it's unreasonable to have the contractor fix and be responsible for design because they don't have the teams and the setup to be able to take on that responsibility generally.
You also want the control over your finishing
yes.
the products and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So,
and then we have our project managers and they'll arrange the site visits with building control at the right times in conjunction with the builder. So it's a combined effort. And that's because our project manager is representing us as a developer or our client as a developer. So if someone raises something and they're not there, they can't challenge it.
So if you don't have a project manager?
If you don't have a project manager, then you should probably, as a developer, go to those visits, because if the example we talked about, building control, say, actually, I want 100 million stations instead of 50, it's going to cost you £4,000 extra, and you're not there, the builder's going to say, okay, we have to do that because the client needs building control. They've said it's needed, so I'll do it, and I have to charge them £4,000. Whereas if you go there yourself or a project, you say, actually, sorry, Mr. Building Control, we've just done 4 projects with you, and they've all been at 50 mil. Why are you now saying 100? You can, try and challenge it and see if it's fair, or or find something that's a counter argument. So actually, because we're doing this, that's why we only need to do 50. And then he goes, oh, that's right. I remember. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I forgot what I said in the plan check.
And if you don't do the attending, then what you're doing is you're relying on the builder to tell building control as well what they might do. And that might be the most expensive.
I would say, without a doubt, our project management team save close to our fee just on, talking to building control and negotiating these things. Because if it's just you and the builder, you say without experience, you don't know how to challenge it, or just the builder, building control will add in things because
the building control and the builder will agree the highest value item.
Yeah, the easiest, highest value thing. Yeah. And they won't challenge it. Whereas a good project manager will challenge it if they can and they got the experience.
And under the JCT contract, if the building control states something, what happens? Who's responsible for ensuring that happens? Who's the employer?
Yeah, but it's delegated contractually, isn't it? So if building control raise something,
but it's
a variation, and then you instruct the builder. Obviously, as a developer, you're responsible, but you've delegated that responsibility to the builder by instructing them, and then they've got the contractual obligation.
So you're technically then, if you don't attend, getting a price from the builder that you've not attended and not talked about.
Yeah,
that you then have to agree as a variation because you have no choice of that.
And it's from building control's perspective, they've agreed on site with the builder. It's happening. They're expecting it to happen. If it doesn't happen, they'll raise it as an issue maybe, and then you might have rework. It might cost you more later.
Lovely. So the builder's entering into a contract here with a value. What do you want to see as a insurance against that for the builder? What insurance?
Right, insurances. Yeah. So the type of insurances that generally the builder should have for, say, these contracts, public liability insurance. and insurance called, say, contract works or building works insurance. So if you've got a contract amount of, say, £100,000 with that scope of work, as a minimum, the builder should cover that amount. Yeah. So if something gets, what's an example? Some materials get delivered to site gets broken into, those materials get stolen. If that insurance is not in place, the builder's insurance isn't in place.
Yep.
And they paid for it, and it's been stolen.
It's a loss to the builder.
It's just a loss. And then
they're still contractually obliged to provide it. And therefore, you put in your project at risk because that builder might not be able to.
Yeah, so the builder should have to provide it, so they should have the insurance because they're technically contracted for that.
But as the employer,
if the builder gets into financial problems because of
it's your problem.
It's your problem. It becomes your problem. And in the circumstance like that, it pretty much would always become the developer's problem because the builder will go, it got stolen.
Yeah.
I need to charge you to get it again. And then you have an argument. Whereas if you have the insurance in the first place, it's like, yes, it got stolen. That's not good, Mr. Builder. That's what your insurance is for. Please go and get that material, crack on with the works and claim it from your insurance company.
All risks on.
Yeah, you can do all risks. So I think all risk. So I was talking about the bigger developments where there's design and build and also big damages for like delays. That's where an all risk policy comes in because it's like, oh geez, what's an example? So I had a big development in Manchester where the curtain wall subcontractor went bump about halfway through the build, delayed the project and all those sort of things. So there was an all risk policy with the contractor, which was actually requested by us as a developer and the lender involved. So the delayed damages in essence are covered by that insurance policy.
Yeah. Which is the best scenario for everybody at that point, right?
Yeah. So our circumstances...
It depends on the value because it's quite an expensive policy.
Can get expensive. Usually for these size contract works and public liability is the main stuff. And then if
you're over 100K, you should be really thinking.
And also separate to that, you want professional indemnity from, say, your other consultants.
Yes.
Say architects and engineers and planning consultants, people like that.
Yeah. Lovely.
Project managers.
Project managers, yeah. Who's responsible for the health and safety on site? You or the builder?
Well, everyone is responsible. Has some sort of responsible health and safety.
Okay.
Ultimately, as the developer, you're the overarching responsibility. You can.
How should you manage that?
Yeah. So in building works, there is a role which used to be the CDM coordinator, is now the principal designer in the UK. So basically, any building project where there's more than, I think, one contractor involved, including subcontractors. So if you got one man who's doing everything, I think technically you might not need it. But I don't know any refurbishments where that's the case. So probably every project you do, you would need a principal designer as a legal obligation. So you need it.
And if you don't get one, whose problem is it if something goes wrong?
So to start, if you don't employ a principal designer, you are the principal designer as the developer, basically. So you are fully responsible. So, and what they do is they do a pre-construction coordination check of all the designs and safety elements associated. They do a full pack from a safety perspective, and they review risk assessments of the contract and all those sort of things. So,
in some cases, help them write them. If a builder's upgrading,
potentially for these size developments, sometimes there's builders in this space that work very safe. They've done it for a long time. They haven't actually documented it properly. So some companies can help them document it. An example is like if you've got a contractor that's working off a ladder and falls and injures himself, and you've checked the risk assessment and you shouldn't have been doing that. There's not really much else you can do. Obviously, if you go to site and see it, you should pick it up. If you haven't been to site, what else can you do? Whereas if you didn't do that work and you didn't do that check of their risk assessment,
and he doesn't know whether he should be, shouldn't be.
Yeah,
ultimately,
there's a potential bad legal circumstance there, and also someone's working on safely and it's dangerous.
Yeah, lovely. So principal design, it's not really an option. You should be getting there.
Yeah.
Or in most scenarios, especially if you're doing anything with serious.
I would say a lot of investors in these size properties in the space don't either know about a principal designer or get them engaged. It's really, really important if you're going to be doing any of these sort of projects.
Yeah.
We always
insist on it.
On all of our projects, we insist on it, regardless of lender, no lender, etc.
Yeah. And it is for your benefit ultimately because it is a cost, but the the back end of that if you didn't have it.
Yeah,
that cost becomes
the minor costs be the major problems that could come as a result.
Yeah.
It's not absolutely not worth the risk.
Lovely. Right then. So we've got the tenders. We've done the contractor interview. We've selected our person or building contractor. We've entered into a JCT scope of works. We've been through all the points on that regarding, the main things like payment terms and VATs and damages and process for agreeing variations and completion handover requirements. We've then engaged building control. We've engaged principal design. We're there.
Yeah, populate the building contract with those key requirements you've agreed.
Yeah.
Get them signed off by both parties.
Get it signed off.
And then get going. Now you're ready. Sorry, and then to start on site, there's things like you need your building control notice in place.
Yep.
You need you should have your principal designer, your pre-construction pack.
Asbestos survey.
Survey.
Possibly doing a conversion.
Yeah, so generally our key checks are asbestos survey, principal designer pack, contract signs, and building control notice with the right time, and then those key things. Then you're sort of ready to start on site. Obviously, funding in place and things like that as well.
Yeah. Funding has to be done because if you build and ask for a drawdown in 4 weeks and you're still going through funding legals, and
we do have that sometimes
where a bad scenario
where us or our clients purchase it with cash, but the development finance isn't there, and you want to make sure that you're ready to go, and the builder is going to get paid when they need to. That's for sure.
I wouldn't do that if it's your first development. I'll make sure everything's in line. Lovely, and then we're ready to rock.
Ready to go.
Start on site. Check them in on day one. At least I would have thought.
Yeah, do a bit of a check-in, and we can talk more about the site monitoring process in a later date, I think.
Lovely. That's it then.
Yeah, thanks very much. Hope everyone gets a bit of value out of that.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Tim. Good to share your knowledge. Thanks very much once again. Very insightful. And thanks for joining us on the Financial Freedom Podcast. And we'll catch you on.
See you next time.
Take care.
Yeah.
Thank you once again for joining us on the Financial Freedom Podcast, sponsored by us at Property Portfolio Building. If you want to get in touch with us about today's podcast or any of the learning topics that we've gone through today, you can email us at podcast@invest-prop.co.uk or get in touch with us with whichever your social media platform of choice is. If you think you would add value to us as a guest on this podcast, you can please get in touch and let us know what you would be able to talk to us about. Other than that, we wish you well on your financial freedom journeys. And once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one.